everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Black-Liberation.Tech podcast. I am your host, Dr. Renee Jordan, and I'm still sharing video from my ride to Wai'anapanapa State Park in Maui, Hawaii. It has black sand beaches, and I am very excited to see it. So, in this episode, Road to a PhD Part 2, I'm going to pick up where I left off, hopefully giving you a good view of what's happening as I drive. For those of you who are listening, I want to encourage you to go ahead to my YouTube channel at Black-Liberation.Tech in order to see what I'm talking about. I understand that the drive is beautiful and I have a little ways to go. So, in the last episode, I talked about taking standardized tests and how to prepare for the different sections. So once again, see which section is not your strong suit and focus on that. For example, if a test has a reading comprehension section, a writing section, and a math section, see which one, based on what you know about yourself, gives you the most trouble and spend the most time studying that section. I'm not saying don't study the other parts, but spend the most time on the sections that give you the most trouble. In my case, when I was taking the praxis for the biology content area, botany or plant biology was not my strong suit. So after studying that, I went back and the third time was the charm and I was able to pass the test. I previously missed it by 1 point. Now, if you're taking a test and perhaps you didn't learn a specific section at all, create your own lesson plan for it and break it out on calendar days so that you can see when you will study that particular content or skill. Use Google to find study guides and look up practice tests and quizzes. And for those of you who have aunties and uncles and family members and godparents to help you out, instead of asking for the latest and greatest pair of shoes, ask them to cover the cost of your test, because a $100 test, a $200 test, or even like your application fees to apply to go to school, ask them to help you with that. And ask if they can partner with you in terms of asking you questions that you know you will have to answer on the test. Make it interesting. Create a game for it and make it a contest amongst your friends who might also be taking the same test or your classmates. Perhaps you all are going to graduate school and you want to make sure that you all get ahead as it relates to the GRE or the LSAT or the MCAT. See what you can do to work as a group, to work in your community towards your goal. As it relates to asking for someone to help cover the cost of tests, if you know someone is willing to give you things, perhaps they'll also be interested in helping you invest in your future. It can help you defray some of the costs that come along with applying and going to school, especially if you're applying to more than one school. Also, look into how you can perhaps get the test fee or the application fee waived. There are waivers out there. You just have to look for it. But I can't cover everything, so follow those people who have all of the good information and do what they tell you to do. So take advantage of waivers, take advantage of the information that's out there to help you along your way. Now, in addition to taking a look at the subject areas or the skill areas that give you the most trouble, perhaps you need to enroll in a prep course. There are prep classes. Some people have SAT prep as an actual course that they can take during school, and sometimes they can take it after school. If you're someone who does not have access to a SAT prep at your school, look into how you can get into an SAT prep class. I would like to say making sure that you get good grades in English and math will be the answer to your SAT troubles, but that's not the case. There are actual strategies to taking standardized tests when it comes to these entrance exams, and it's more than just doing well in English and math. You have to have a strategy in order to help you while you're taking these tests. Strategies that will help you determine not only the most likely correct answer, but what to do when you get stuck. When should you circle back to something? When should you skip it altogether? When Do you need to make sure that you're able to review the reading passage? And how do you review the reading passage in order to look for the best answer? So if you can get into an SAT prep class or some kind of preparatory class for the LSAT, the MCAT, the ACT, and any of those types of standardized tests, I do encourage you to do so. I was fortunate enough to be able to have SAT prep, and they actually had SAT prep questions in a number of my classes that went along with the warm-up to help us get ready. I did mention that some schools are opting out of SAT scores and others are going back and forth between accepting them or not emphasizing them. However, it's not a bad class to take if you have access to it, or if you could get someone to help support you by taking a SAT prep class so that you could have options and have more opportunities available to you when applying for school. Now, whether or not the school emphasizes taking the SAT or the ACT, there are other ways that you need to prepare for going to college. And those other ways include things that you need to do over the course of your middle school and high school years. For example, participating in extracurricular activities. That's very helpful, especially if you go beyond just being a member to actually holding leadership positions. Schools are interested in whether or not you have taken advantage of leadership opportunities. Those leadership opportunities can come by way of the Student Government Association, your cheer team or dance squad, whether you're the captain or co-captain of your team sport, or whether you engage in other things, perhaps an academic club or volunteer work, and even clubs outside of school. Perhaps you are part of a club team that actually travels. For example, I have a niece in a volleyball team that travels, and they do not all attend the same school. And as a result, she's able to get into competitions that are not necessarily always open to all schools. So prepare yourself when you have to take a standardized test. Don't just walk in and just take it without any thought. Give it some thought. At least know what's going to be covered on it, and think about how you perform on those different topics. In addition to thinking about and planning for standardized tests, think about your journey, whether it's an academic club, a sports club, volunteer work. Perhaps you volunteer at a soup kitchen or a food pantry or a clothing closet where clothes are given to those in need. All of these opportunities help to give colleges and universities an idea of the type of student you are. Are you well-rounded, or do you have a singular focus? The activities you engage in can help paint that picture for those who are in charge of admissions. So now I'm going to transition and circle back to my story about running into my friend who was in my cohort of the Prince George's County Resident Teacher Program. I ran into her at the mall and we chatted for a little bit. I asked her who decides what gets taught in my classroom, and I shared with her the issue that I was having. I was experiencing some cognitive dissonance, and so my brain was trying to figure it out because I like to have things worked out logically in my mind. And so when I took a look at the emphasis on testing and the way the curriculum was laid out, and my experience that I had as a biology student in high school as well as in undergraduate school, I was concerned. I was concerned that the students who were in my class were not getting a fair shake as it related to what I thought would be most important if someone was preparing to be a biology major or to take biology in college, or just getting a general experience with biology in order to be an informed citizen. So she said, you know what? You sound like you would be good at public policy, because those are the people who decide the standards. They, in the long run, they decide the standards. They decide what gets taught. They're the ones who determine what shows up in the voluntary state curriculum. They say voluntary, but when you're told you have to be on page 58 along with the classroom down the hall, and you have a co-taught class that also has not just general education students, but special education students, as well as ESOL students, It's like, come on now. There needs to be some recognition of what's really happening. So anyway, she said I would be good at public policy. I looked into public policy schools. Georgia State at the time, their Masters of Public Administration, so MPA program, was 23rd in the country. I also looked at George Washington University because it was one of the schools that I really wanted to go to for undergrad, but they were not trying to give me a scholarship. So I was just like, oh, well, that was a nice thought. Thank you for the acceptance. I will not be attending. And so I returned to the thought of going to George Washington University, so much so that I planned to go to an orientation. And I thought I was doing good in terms of timing in order to get to the orientation. But for those of you who are familiar with the DMV, you know that traffic in DC can be horrendous. And so by the time I got on New York Avenue, it was a wrap. I got into so much traffic that I did not make it to the orientation, and instead I turned back around and went home. And even going home was a challenge in the traffic. So I was just like, this is not going to work. Being able to drive to class was something that I was looking forward to. However, the headache of the traffic in DC gave me a reality check that I probably should not count on being able to drive to class if I wanted to go to this school. And it was such a headache that I decided that it was not worth the further inquiry. I was used to working 10 to 12 minutes away from my home in Maryland, and I became accustomed to that travel time. For 5.5 years, I worked as a teacher in Prince George's County, Maryland, and my commute was 10 to 12 minutes on a good day. And 2 years before becoming a teacher, I also worked in Maryland, also in Prince George's County, and it wasn't far from my home, and I was used to, once again, a commute that was less than 20 minutes. So the idea of having to get back on the train, something I had to do from 2000 until 2004, I just really wasn't interested in revisiting. So traffic was a factor when I was looking into graduate school programs. That incident allowed me to focus on Georgia State University as my option. So I got myself together. Not only did I plan to apply to Georgia State University, keep in mind, I was still at Bowie State University at this time getting my master's and graduating in 2012. So I took the GRE. They had just changed from a paper test to a computerized version. And because it was the first time that they were doing so, they gave a 50% off discount. So I was very excited about that because who wants to pay full price? So I was able to take the GRE. I did all right, but when I looked at the requirements for Georgia State University's PhD program, I realized that my scores were not going to make it. I even called to ask how much emphasis is placed on the GRE scores, and they shared, Georgia State University's department chair at the time for the PhD program in public policy, shared that they really rely on it heavily because it's a way of distributing limited resources. I decided to take a closer look at the MPP program, the Masters of Public Policy program, to see what the GRE score requirement was for the master's. And my math score fit the bill for the Masters of Public Policy program. And because the first 2 years of the PhD program actually covered the classes that I would need to take in the MPP program, I said, hey, if I start there, I can prove myself to be an excellent student, and perhaps they will count my actual grades and completing the MPP program towards my first 2 years of the PhD program at Georgia State University. And so I said to myself, okay, well, I'll get started with the master's program, and that way I can see if I like it, because this was going to be, once again, a new discipline or a new field for me. So if I saw that I liked it, then I would be able to say, hey, look how well I've done for the coursework that's the equivalent for the PhD program. So I applied to Georgia State University, and because I was a teacher, I said to myself, let me set myself up for success because chances are I will need to work. So I went ahead and applied for my Georgia Professionals Certificate. In other words, my Georgia Educator's License. And I provided them with my transcripts. I provided them with the information that they requested. And I was able to get a Georgia Educator's License that had some provisions around it because I still needed to take one class. And that one class was for exceptional students. And so I went online and I found where they offered that exceptional students course. I took it over the summer, and as a result, I was able to update my Georgia Professional Certificate or my Georgia Educator's License to one that was free and clear. So it did not have any provisional or temporary limitations to it. It was good as any other teacher in the state of Georgia. And so around April, I had the provisional Georgia Professional Certificate. And by the end of the summer of 2012, I had the free and clear Georgia Professional Certificate or Georgia Educator's License so that I could present myself as a stronger candidate for a teaching position. Keep in mind that in May 2012, I graduated from Bowie State University with my Master's in Education, Secondary Education Curriculum Specialist. A part of what provoked my curiosity was that I took on the Master of Education, Secondary Education Curriculum Specialist to ensure that I wasn't missing something by taking an alternative route to teacher certification with the Prince George's County Alternative Teaching Program. What I found was that I learned more about best practices and how to implement them. However, some of the things that we were required to do or things that were emphasized as a result of the stress on testing seemed to be counterproductive to research-based best practices. Now, that year from 2011 until 2012, I gave my students all I had. Not only did I make sure that I kept up with the requirements that were held to our biology teachers in terms of staying on pace, but I also wove in those things that I felt would help students prepare best, not only for a biology class in college, but in life. And it was exhausting. So to circle back to my graduation, I was very excited. It was a big deal because I was like, wow, I had gone back to school after taking 6 years off after graduating from undergraduate school before returning to school for a master's. And I was concerned about becoming a student all over again because I was out of practice in terms of being graded, being tested, writing papers. And so I was very proud of myself for completing my Master's of Education. Not only did I complete it, I did well. My thesis went over very well with my advisor, Dr. Bruce Krim. Leading up to the final submission of my thesis, I had to have meetings with my advisor and submit drafts to him. And he told me, you write so well. There's no reason that you shouldn't go on to get a PhD. Do you know? I was like, oh, wow, sure, I could do that. And so that was one of the triggers to consider going back to school to get a PhD. So between the conversation with my advisor, Dr. Bruce Krim, and the conversation that I had with my friend from the Prince George's County or PG County Resident Teacher Program, I set out for a PhD. So to circle back just a little, I took the Exceptional Students course over the summer online. I finished it and I submitted the paperwork in order to get the free and clear Georgia Educator Certificate. And so at that point, I started looking at schools. Now, it's one thing to look at schools online or school districts. And I was like, I need to see this thing in person. I need to talk to people. And I didn't really know teachers in Georgia. I did have a student in my biology class who lived in Georgia with her mom and moved to Maryland to stay with her dad. She was not only in my class, she also went to my church. And so I knew her family. And one of the things she told me was that school is different in Maryland. And there were times in class that she had this bewildered look on her face, like, what in the world? So knowing that things aren't always what they seem online, the encounter that I had with the student who went to school in Georgia, and my interest in going to Georgia to become a teacher while I went to school, I decided that I need to look into schools that were in Atlanta, Georgia, or near Atlanta, Georgia, to get a better idea as far as what I was getting myself into. So I noticed the National Science Teacher Association Conference in Atlanta, Georgia. One of my girlfriends from my home church in Maryland was now in Atlanta, Georgia. So when I went to the conference, she allowed me to stay over in order to attend the conference without having to buy a hotel room. Budgets are everything. Make sure you are friendly with people so they will be friendly to you. You never know when you might need to stay the night somewhere, or you might just want to stay the night to visit with someone. So I stayed with her while I went to the National Science Teacher Association Conference. So I asked the teachers at the conference, hey, I'm looking to move to Atlanta, Georgia. What are some good counties to actually work in? And people were giving me feedback. And one lady told me, oh, well, this is a good county. She gave me the name of the county and she shared that she graduated from that county, so forth and so on. So I'm like, okay, I'll look into that county even further. So this was in November and I actually drove down to Atlanta from Maryland. And so me wanting to get ahead of traffic and wanting to also get home, I left Atlanta at like 3 o'clock or 3:30 in the morning. I should have left later, and this is why. I was on 85 North and a deer ran out in the road. I saw it, stuck my left hand out in front of me to brace myself against the airbag. I hit the deer. I did not try and miss it. I hit that deer. And while I was braking, I eased myself off to the side of the road. And the interesting thing is, I was looking at the mile marker before all of this happened. And so because I was observing the mile marker, I was able to tell the police when I called for help that I had just passed mile marker XYZ. And so because the airbag did deploy, that's an automatic total based on the year of my car. I had a 2004 Honda Accord, if I remember correctly, because when I graduated from college, I got a 2003 Honda Civic, and then I totaled that car. God has blessed me, y'all. Y'all don't even know. I can't go into everything, but I can say that I have been blessed. And another blessing occurred as a result of that total. Because my employers knew that I was having issues with transportation and drove my parents' car, they had bought a 1980-something Buick off of one of my dad's co-workers whose mom passed away. And so I was driving that and I totaled that car. Lord have mercy. Turn to your neighbor and say, but God. And after that, my employer knew that I had totaled my Civic and that I totaled the Buick. And at this point, I was borrowing my sister's Pontiac. And because they knew I had car trouble, and the funny thing about that Pontiac, oh my gosh, it would drive for me, my sister's car. She was letting us drive it, us meaning me and one of my brothers. She was letting us drive it so that we would give our parents a break from driving us to work. And so she had another car. This is a side story, but it's okay. I'll get back to the main story. So she was letting us borrow that car, but when my brother would drive it, because he could drop me off at work and then go to work, he actually didn't want to drive it because for some reason, when he drove it, the car would cut off. For example, he would be getting off of an exit and the car would cut off, or he would be driving and it would stall. So he was not interested in driving the car. He observed that when I drove the car, it didn't cut off. And so I would drive him to work. He worked in Upper Marlboro. I worked in Laurel. And then I have another brother who at the time was working in Laurel as well. And so I was the driver getting us all around. And so my employers in Laurel, they knew that I was having car trouble. And so they said, hey, we can't give you a raise because we're a small business. And so we have to stay within a certain level. But what we can do is purchase a car for you or give you money towards a car. And so they gave me a budget and I went and I found the car that fit that budget. And it was a Mitsubishi Mirage. And I'm sure you all already know, but just in case you don't, do not buy a car at night. Do not look at a car at night, specifically a used car. So what ended up happening is that I looked at the car at night. My brother-in-law came with me, so I wasn't by myself, and it was in pretty good shape. But when I went to go and pay for it and pick it up, do you know they had changed the seats out of the car? The seats were terrible. The seats were so bad, they probably had been through a flood. But me, because I was like, well, you know, it is what it is. I took those seats and I sanctified them. I sprayed them down until my brother-in-law was like, oh my gosh. I cleaned that car like some of those people on TikTok be cleaning cars until it looked like a whole nother vehicle. I mean, I cleaned it good. And so I had that Mitsubishi Mirage, but it was a lemon. And there was a light on that was never going to be fixed and some other issues. So I had that Mitsubishi Mirage as a result of working with that small business, the property management company. And when I became a teacher, I let them know that I was going to participate in the PG County Alternative Teaching Program. And so I stopped working at the property management company in June of 2007. I was employed there for 2 years, and I told them that I wanted to become a teacher. And what inspired me to become a teacher was an observation that my mother made and a recommendation. So my mother observed the financial challenges I was having and provided me with some wisdom. She was like, you have a degree in biology. Why don't you go teach it? And I said, okay. Now, some talk about teacher pay, and it does need to be increased. But let me tell you about me. Going from an accounts payable, accounts receivable representative at the property management company. So keep in mind, I was a representative. I was not the accountant for the property management company. So I was not the one who had the CPA and actually managed the money for the whole company. I managed it for the HOAs, so the homeowner associations and the condominium associations. So I would collect their money, whether they mailed it in, brought it in, or paid it online, and then I would turn around and pay the bills. So like their landscaping, snow removal, some condominiums had water and electricity bills that needed to be paid. And so that was my job. And so going from the accounts receivable, accounts payable representative to teaching biology actually doubled my pay. And so I talked to my then employers at the property management company about becoming a teacher. The owner knew that I was not going to stay there long term. He observed how well I picked up on things and how I moved. And so he knew it was a matter of time. And so they supported my decision. While I was working there, I looked up ways to get certified to become a teacher. And I came across the Prince George's County Resident Teacher Program. I applied to it. I was accepted. But in order to do it, I had to not only engage in classes and workshops that would provide me with the academic knowledge, if you will, in terms of pedagogy and student learning and the required reading courses, but I also had to shadow a biology teacher over the summer in summer school during the day. So I had to quit the job at the property management company in order to shadow the teacher during summer school during the day. Now, this was a wing and a prayer. I was already not making a whole lot of money, but I was walking by faith. And so I needed to be able to get through the summer until I got my first check. And I did. Praise the Lord. So I did that summer teaching in order to become a teacher. And so I started teaching in the fall of 2007. And I was able to start as a highly qualified teacher because of my bachelor's degree, because I shadowed a teacher over the summer and had time to practice teaching. So I did teach some of the lessons during the summer school and receive feedback from the teacher of record. And I passed the Praxis 1 that went over reading comprehension, writing, and math, that Praxis. And so after the summer session, the training continued from August 2007 until June 2008. And so that's when I took additional classes on pedagogy, reading, and by the end of it, I had to complete the biology content praxis test. And so during that time, I took the test 3 times, and I also had a portfolio that I had to gather. I had a mentor who would stop in and give me feedback on my lessons. And so my portfolio contained different lesson plans and examples of student work and examples of grading, so rubrics that I used and all kinds of things. So at the end of that whole program, I was a highly qualified teacher. So I was able to start off as a highly qualified teacher, and by the end, I had my Maryland teaching certificate that would last X number of years. So whatever the regular allotted amount of time would be before I would need to renew it. So I say all that to say, I did a lot to become a teacher. Now, circling back, I know this is long, but I got time. So circling back to Georgia and the car accident, this is all connected. Just hold on and stay with me. So when I became a teacher and I got my first set of checks, that's when I bought that Honda Accord, the 2004 Honda Accord Coupe that I totaled in November 2012. I purchased it as a teacher in 2007. And that's all I ever wanted in life. I wanted a 2-door Honda Accord. My sister had a 4-door Honda Accord, and that's what I learned to drive in. And so I wanted a 2-door Honda Accord. After renting a Mustang in Chicago, I was hooked on a coupe, but I knew that I wanted a larger coupe after having that 2-door Honda Civic because it just got blown around too much by trucks that would drive by. And so the 2-door Honda Accord, I actually wanted the Accord when I graduated, but settled on the Civic. Don't settle. Get what you want. It might just need to be older to be at the right price. That's all. Word to the wise. Okay. So I wanted a 2-door Honda Accord, and that's what I got. It was silver. I wanted red, but you know, you do what you can. Red was not an option. And so that's what I did. I got what I wanted, a 2004 Honda Accord Coupe. So that's the car I totaled on the way home from Georgia after the National Science Teacher Association Conference. And I was crushed because guess what? Y'all, I bought that car in 2007 and I totaled it in 2012, and I had just paid it off in like April of that year. Not only did I just pay it off, I also had the air conditioning repaired as well as the shocks and the strats repaired. And now it was done. So I'm going to stop here and encourage you to come back to episode 3. And just a reminder of some of the things that I talked about and some things that I want to encourage you in. I want you to explore what makes up the different standardized tests that you have to take in order to get to school. Take any preparatory classes necessary. See if you have family or friends of the family or godparents who are willing to assist you in your journey of higher education, whether that support comes by paying for the test or helping you prepare by quizzing you. If you can't get into a prep class, or even if you get into a prep class, see what's out there online to help you study and study the most on the things that give you the most angst. Now, for those of you who are working and you have a bachelor's degree and you're not satisfied with where you are, or perhaps you have a bachelor's degree and you're not sure where to go next, I will say this. Teaching for 7 years and having over 1,600 students taught me lessons that could not be learned anywhere else. As much as I taught those students taught me. They shaped my soft skills to the point where people recognize that I'm different. When I came into higher education, people noticed that I had the patience of Job. They noticed that I could work with anyone. They saw how I would put them in the driver's seats when it came to trainings. I was a facilitator. I was not a lecturer. I required that those who engaged in my workshops were hands-on. They were the ones touching their computers. They were the ones who were creating content. They were the ones who were organizing their classes. They were the ones walking through what needed to be done to integrate and use technology for themselves as well as in their classroom and learning environments. I empowered those as an instructional technologist with the ability to explore and to experiment and to play and test things out and then figure out how they wanted to work in their class. I was able to facilitate even one-on-one sessions in subject areas that I never worked in personally as a professional. For example, I worked with one of the former art department chairs in order to create a new online course based upon a vision that he had, and we were able to create lessons and projects to help support what he wanted to accomplish in terms of making graphic narratives in his course. So graphic narratives are also known as comic books. And so he had students to work in teams in order to create graphic novels. Let me correct myself. In order to create graphic novels in his course, and they did so by navigating technology to support that project. And that was one of my memorable moments. I also supported a Chinese study professor. I've supported an economics professor. I've supported those who work in Africana studies. And I say that to say my technology skills, my teaching skills, not only lent well to me working with those in STEM, that's a given. I worked well with those who were in biology and chemistry, but I was also able to work well with those in humanities and music. Well, music, I had a cheat sheet. I could tell them about my singing and even playing with the piano. And so by connecting with people on similarities, by connecting with people because I had a liberal arts education, and so my background was broad, I was able to connect with people on levels of interest to them as experts and help them with their technology by first letting them know I cared about them as a person and as an expert and as a professional. And so those are things that I learned from my students. You have to let students know that you care about them as a person and recognize that they have expertise as well. This is a random example, but hopefully you catch where I'm going. One day I was teaching and I had a student who told me, "Miss Jordan, you don't have eyeliner on." Oh my gosh. This young lady told me that I did not wear eyeliner that day. And she was right, because I wore eyeliner every other day. And this is what I will tell you. If I am hiring someone, what that demonstrated to me by her observing that I did not have on eyeliner that day was that she had attention to detail at a level that surpassed, at least by her verbalizing it, not just noticing it, but verbalizing it. Perhaps others noticed, but they didn't say anything, that she had a level of detail when it came to making observations about me, her teacher, that others did not express in a similar way. And so that is unique and something to consider when you are working with people, you want people who pay attention. I'm telling you, paying attention is more than a notion. And so I want to encourage anyone who might be in the middle of deciding what to do. See teaching also as an opportunity to give back to your community. I saw it as a way to give back to those who taught me. I did 7 years and I spent those 7 years teaching as if I was sitting in the classroom because that's how I felt. I could have been a student in that classroom. And so how would I like for my teacher to engage with me? How would I like for my teacher to hold me accountable to what it is that I am supposed to know, what I am supposed to do in order to accomplish my goals? And I worked with my students. Now, this is one thing that I would do for my students. Any student who took a test and they were not satisfied with their test score, I allowed them to do test remediation and earn back half of the points they missed. And so that worked out so that whoever, let's say, earned the top grade in the class, a person could not earn more than the person who had the top grade. So that made it fair. And it also gave people an opportunity to try again. I mean, in life, you get to try again. So wherever possible, if you're a teacher, think about how you can have students remediate opportunities where they did not succeed to the best of their ability or did not experience success the first time around. And I guarantee you, if you have them to not just get the right answer, but explain why that answer is correct and write it out. I made them write. It wasn't something that they typed up and sent to me. That might have to be modified for those of you who do tests online, but you're creative. You'll think of a way. That was helpful to my students. And so circling back, teaching gave me the soft skills that prepared me to work at a greater level or greater quality with others after I transitioned into higher education. And so I want to encourage anyone who's trying to figure out what to do, try teaching, at least for 2 years. And I'll share how a conversation with a colleague changed my life as a result of teaching for 5 years in STEM. So once again, thank you for listening to another episode of the Black-Liberation.Tech podcast. I am your host, Dr. Renee Jordan. Please feel free to like, subscribe, and share, rate, and review the podcast so that it becomes more discoverable. And until next time, take care. Bye-bye.